Greetings, everyone. We are recording this Saturday afternoon. As many of you know, Cynthia came home sick Wednesday, and we wanted to make sure that she does not have COVID. So we went to get her tested Wednesday night, and unfortunately, the results have not come back from that test. We believe that they will be negative. She's feeling fine, I'm feeling fine, David is fine, the dog is fine. So we're all fine, but we wanted to still do our safe practices of waiting for that negative test. So, glad I could record this for you. Cynthia is helping me. I want to say a big thanks to all of the folks pitching in to make this service possible today. This is Plan B that Barb and I were talking about just in case this happens. But a big thanks to Barb and Tammy. I want to say thank you to the Contemporary team. I want to say thanks to Spencer and Allison and Julianne for bringing in her video as well for her school. All right, so let's get started this morning. Our sermon title is Consider the Source. A tourist in Vienna is going through a graveyard, and all of a sudden he hears music. No one is around, so he starts searching for the source. He's considering the source. He finally locates the origins and finds it coming from a grave with a headstone that reads Ludwig van Beethoven, 1770, 1827. Then he realizes that the music is Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, and it's being played backwards. He's very puzzled about this. He leaves the graveyard and persuades a friend to return with him. By the time they arrive back at the grave, the music has changed. This time it's the Seventh Symphony. But like the previous piece, it's being played backwards. Curious, the men agree to consult a music scholar. When they return with the expert, the Fifth Symphony now is being played, and again, it's backwards. The expert notices that the symphonies are being played in the reverse order in which they were composed, the Ninth, the Seventh, and the Fifth. By the next day, the word had spread, and a crowd had gathered around the grave. They are all listening now to the Second Symphony being played backwards. Just then, the graveyard caretaker ambles up to the group. Someone in the group asks him if he has an explanation for the music. I would have thought it was obvious, the caretaker says. He's decomposing. And Cynthia's trying not to laugh too hard at that. Oh, that's pretty funny. So here's my point in that is that, and today I really want to encourage us. Yes, we have cases that are spiking. We have coronavirus all around us. So I want to encourage us today to be hopeful, to keep the faith, and here's how we're going to do it. God is not decomposing. The virus cannot stop Christ coming, celebrating Christmas, Christ living, Christ dying, and being resurrected, which means nothing can separate us from the love of God. The virus cannot topple God off God's throne. God is greater than any virus. And here's the other aspect of this that we'll bring out during our sermon time, that God heals in three ways. Divine intervention, which we'll hear today from Scripture from Acts 9:32 through 43. There's a partnership in healing where God partners with humanity. We'll talk about that. And then finally, there's the heavenly eternal healing. God will never let our souls decompose because God is always healing us. So, together, let's compose a symphony to live by. As Peter traveled about the country, this comes from Acts 9:32 through 43, he went to visit the Lord's people who lived in Lydda. Let's look at our map now to help us with the travels of not Paul, but Peter today. You can see on our map that actually Peter does some traveling himself. We are here, Lydda, and Joppa will be named as well in a moment. You'll see Peter, he has this journey that is similar to Paul, where he ends up in Rome. But we will use this journey of Peter to demonstrate the journey that we take with God, or how I should say, the journey of the Bible and how it shares its relevance with us, it shares its love with us, and today it shares its hope with us. All right, so that's where our story originates from today, is Lydda and Joppa. Let's hear about it now. As Peter traveled about the country, he went to visit the Lord's people who lived in Lydda. There he found a man named Aeneas, who was paralyzed and had been bedridden for 8 years. Aeneas, Peter said to him, Jesus Christ heals you. Get up, roll up your mat. Immediately Aeneas got up. Consider this. Then Jesus said to him, get up, pick up your mat and walk. At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. Very similar. This comes from John 5:8. What I had just read comes from Acts 9. Look at this piece now. This is really good for us. Always listen twice. First, what's being said, and then who said it. Peter was listening to Jesus when he was traveling with him, seeing Jesus heal people. And so Peter, being a Sunday school student, used the same premise to heal Aeneas. Always listen twice. What's being said? What was being said? A divine healing in those 3 categories of healing. And who said it? Jesus. Consider the source. But Peter wasn't done quite yet. Again, look at what he says to this person, Aeneas. He is invoking the name of Christ for healing. All those who lived in Lydda and Sharon saw him and turned to the Lord. So this great moment, right, where you see this healing and you go, wow, that was so impressive, this one event. People are turning, heads are turning for Jesus, a divine healing miracle, if you will. But God's not done yet. In Joppa, there was a disciple named Tabitha. In Greek, her name is Dorcas. Imagine the trouble she had in school with the name, in Greek, Dorcas. She was always doing good and helping the poor. Good for her. About that time, she became sick and died. And her body was washed and placed in an upstairs room. Lydda was near Joppa. Remember now where our story originates. I put it here in the corner. I have to look a little harder there, but right next to where Lydda is, there's Joppa. Lydda was near Joppa. So when the disciples heard that Peter was in Lydda, they sent 2 men to him and urged him, please come at once. Peter went with them, and when he arrived, he was taken upstairs to the room, and the widows stood around him, crying and showing him the robes and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was still with them. When we read some text that's 2,000 years old, we want to get into the moment of it, that is happening in real time for the people that we are reading. So what you want to imagine now is the sorrow pouring out of these people, losing someone that they loved. We can empathize with that. For many of you, you know exactly how that feels. Peter sent them all out of the room. Then he got down on his knees and prayed. Consider the source. That now he is, again, not praying from the source of himself, but from Jesus, who he walked with, who he saw do miracles, who he loved. Turning toward the dead woman, he said, Tabitha, get up. She opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. So here we have now Peter composing a symphony to live by. I want to show you now the parallel, again, of Peter being a good Sunday school student. Tabitha, get up. She opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He looked at her and took her by the hand and helped her up. Where did Peter get such an idea as this? From Mark 1:30 and 31. Peter, Simon's mother-in-law, was in bed with a fever, and they immediately told Jesus about her. So Jesus went to her, took her by the hand, and helped her up. Again, Peter is considering the source, letting God work through him because he was a good Sunday school student. Then he called, we're back now to Tabitha and the raising of the dead here with Tabitha, with Peter. Then he called for all the believers, especially the widows, and presented her to them alive. This became known all over Joppa, and many people believed in the Lord, of course, a significant event. Peter stayed in Joppa for some time with a tanner named Simon. Again, he is following this idea of considering the source. Always listen twice. First, what's being said, a divine healing, and then who said it. Peter is really echoing what Jesus said. Now we're thinking, well, that's Peter, right? I mean, he's amazing. He's fantastic. He's a disciple. I'm no disciple. In the bottom of our map here, we live in an imperfect world. We are imperfect people that make imperfect choices. Even Peter. I mentioned earlier that this map is also a good journey. It shows us a journey that God is taking us on through the Bible. And here's what I mean by that. First, we see Peter working down in this area. Whoops. Going the wrong way. He's here. Now, after this, in Acts 9, he is going to go north to Antioch. Or I'm sorry, in Acts 10, he's going to be in Caesarea first before he goes to Antioch. In Caesarea, there's a great story of Peter being shown equality. First, equality in food. That there were restrictions for the Jews, that they were on a specific diet in the Old Testament, a kosher diet, that they were only supposed to eat certain things. Well, God blows the doors off. You can eat anything you want, Peter, because whatever I made, he says, is holy, is pure, is clean. And so God uses that analogy now for people. As the story progresses in Acts 10, it is Gentiles that God is really talking about using the analogy of food for Peter. Peter gets it, and he baptizes a Gentile and realizes that they can be part of God's family. Awesome, great, terrific. Now, a little while after that, he journeys to Antioch. There he teams with the Apostle Paul. But in Antioch, in Galatians, it tells us one of the letters that Paul writes to the Galatians, he says this, that he had to rebuke Peter. Rebuke Peter, why? Because he didn't want to eat with the Gentiles. And he had to be reminded, wait a minute, didn't God give you this big production in Acts 10 about that exact same thing? And Peter's like, oh yeah, I forgot. Why? Because we are living in an imperfect world. We're imperfect people, and we make imperfect choices. But that's okay. Now, the journey of the Bible is this, is that when in Genesis, God comes to Abraham and says, look, I want you to go on a journey. I want to take you on a journey. And this journey, as we move forward here, like Peter's journey, if you see the arrows going, will first include just a small group of people. But I want to keep that small group of people together so that they can hasten the coming of the Messiah, so that you can see a plan of God, just like those arrows, a plan of God that at the end will share that Messiah with the entire world. Part of that plan was rules and regulations such as what they could or could not eat, trying to keep that group together so the promise, as said in Genesis, would bless the whole world. That would be the Messiah, Jesus. He would start off Jewish roots, but that would expand. Why would God start with Jesus with Jewish roots and expand? He's trying to keep this group together. So as we read the Bible, like the arrows, we see this plan coming to fruition. We see this plan growing. We can point back and say, oh, now I see what God was doing there. And by the time we get to the New Testament, it explodes into the Messiah is for all people. And so we can look at our faith and go, oh, now I see what God was doing. It bolsters our faith. We know that God has a plan. It was there all along. If we follow the arrows of what God is doing for everyone. And so, The virus cannot stop Christ coming, celebrating Christmas, Christ living, Christ dying, and being resurrected, which means nothing can separate us from the love of God. The virus cannot topple God off God's throne. God is greater than any virus, but we have to remember, consider the source. God heals in 3 ways. I want to expand upon this now. We just read about divine intervention. It got people turning their heads about what was happening because it was miraculous. Look at the second one now, partnership healing. That is God working with humanity. A great example is a vaccine. You say, well, COVID, vaccine. Think about polio, eradicated. Why? Vaccine. Measles. And now COVID-19. God working with humanity. Is it as fast as a divine intervention? No, it's a slower arc. But isn't that just as miraculous when you're saving thousands of lives through a vaccine? Shouldn't that turn our heads as well? Our last piece there is an eternal healing, that God is always healing us. So today I want to give us encouragement that we will be healed, that the vaccines are coming. I want this place to be a place of hope. Even if we have to go remote, it is still a place of hope, because the virus is not going to topple God off God's throne. And we're here to fill you with hope, to fill you with faith, to fill you with assurance. And to tell you this, the contemporary team is going to come up after I'm finished, which will be very soon. They're going to sing Do It Again. The first couple lines here are very informative for us for today's talk. Walking around these walls, I thought by now they'd fall. We could think of everything we've gone through with the virus. But you have never failed yet. You have never failed me yet. We think back now, we're talking about divine healing, we're talking about vaccines, we're talking about how God is working to heal us. We can take stock in that. We can have faith in that. God will never let our souls decompose. Nothing can separate us from the love of God, even this virus. I want to say happy Thanksgiving to everyone. Be safe. We love you. We'll talk again soon. Blessings.